are watching Simon Says on Mtgo Academy featuring Simon Götzen.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Simon Götzen and I'm recording Simon Says number 77, making Simon Says one of the longest running draft video series, limited video series on the net, which I'm very happy about. Thank you for watching. Thanks for mtgoacademy.com for hosting me. And yes, as you might know, as you hopefully know, I generally start my draft videos with a short introduction, and often that's something that's related to the format or maybe even the draft or the matches. And today the topic is sideboarding, which I think is a very underutilized skill in Limited. We all know how important it is in Constructed, and we have an idea of the meta game. We have a clue about the matchups and which ones we want to neglect, which ones we really need to beat, and so on and so on. In Limited, it's different. Limited sideboarding is more of a fine-tuning approach, which in Constructed comes a lot of times before the event starts. But in Limited, you often have these kind of games where you lose for some reason, and then you can go to your sideboard to make up for these weaknesses that your deck might have displayed, or for the power level that your opponent's deck showcased. Sideboarding in Limited is also awesome if you want to fix deck building mistakes. We all make mistakes in deck building. This is true in draft and even more in sealed deck. If you realize in your sealed deck tournament that your colors are wrong, or that some cards are just not as good as you thought they would be, or that you're just playing too many combat tricks, you can fix these mistakes. It might be difficult to accept the fact that you've made a mistake, but it's still better than pushing the mistake and potentially costing you a tourney win or a draft win. So I guess fixing mistakes is already the first reason to be careful when sideboarding. But even more important, I think, is to have this general mindset that sideboarding is an incredible tool in Limited, and whenever your opponent is just hitting that submit button as soon as the sideboarding screen shows up, then he's giving you an edge that you should exploit. Now, why do people just not sideboard? I think there's a couple of things. It's just more complex than Constructed. You can't just have your sideboard plan ready. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, well, you often win games in Limited. Often you think you have a great deck and all your best cards are in your deck. So it's easy to just shortcut this to say, well, why should I sideboard anything, right? But the opposite is often true. There might be the plummet in your sideboard. There might be the naturalize in your sideboard. Cards that you want. Maybe you even want to bring in Divine Favor because your opponent has a lot of Forge Devils and Lightning Strikes. Who knows? So these kind of fine-tuning decisions are difficult but very rewarding if you get them right. And you basically should get into the mindset that after every single game, the sideboarding choices should be evaluated fully. You basically have the time to do that. It's usually not like you have to decide between 17 cards. It's really 3-4 cards at most. And Kenji Tsumura, I hope most of you know the name, that should ring a bell, has famously said that you should sideboard in every single Limited match. Now, clearly, there are games and matches where you don't ever sideboard, and I'm not even sure if that's a rule to follow, because sideboarding just for the sake of it is definitely not a good idea. But I think it gives you a much better approximation of perfect play than to never sideboard or to only very rarely sideboard. And I believe that my videos are also a pretty good example of sideboarding. I try to always think about my options when it comes to sideboarding in Limited. Now, just really quickly, the main way of sideboarding in Limited, I think, is to beat single cards, especially in Core Set Limited, which this is the penultimate core set, so we still have some time to apply these principles. There is a lot of powerful cards in a Limited format, and in particular in Core Set Limited. So there's nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong with trying to beat a single card or a subset of cards while potentially even weakening your deck against others if that gives you the best chance to win the game and the match, it's definitely the right call. So if you make your deck a bit better against some kind of soul, for example, that's definitely a plus. To carry on with that example, if my opponent plays a soul of Chandalar, and I have some Pillar of Lights in my sideboard because I think that my deck is very aggressive and I didn't want to overload on removal, I'm very likely to bring all of them in, just because I know that the soul alone gives my opponent such an edge in the following games that I would much rather over prepare than under prepare for it if I have the option. So the same thing goes for powerful artifacts. If my opponent plays a Haunted Plate Mail or a Juggernaut, I'm super happy to run that Naturalize to have a great tempo play and an awesome card if my opponent has one of his better draws, which is always what you should prepare for. If your opponent's draw is bad, you should be winning regardless. So, sideboarding against single cards, I think, is what most people think of when sideboarding. So that's actually not the most complex one. Now, the next point I made, and it's only 3 points, so we'll be done quickly, is sideboarding against an archetype. Now, the first bullet point is very close to constructed with hate cards, but it's definitely possible in certain scenarios. Now, Corset is really not the best example for that, but if you have a more synergy-driven deck or format, then there might actually be cards that really mess with your opponent's plans. For example, if your opponent's deck is just very set on suspending a lot of cards. I mean, this is a pretty crazy example, but I'm definitely playing all my Rift Sweepers. Clearly, I've picked them up early to have them against my opponent's suspend cards. Now, I'm aware that this is a course head draft video, so you might not be even knowing what I'm talking about. But there are several examples. It's just not all that often that this actually comes into play. Another idea would be to have something to help you against some kind of dedicated mill deck, which might be possible in some formats. All right, you could even board in more cards to beat that. And then there's the axis of aggression. One of my favorite intros ever has been about the axis of aggression. And the key point is really only that, especially at a draft table, but also in your matches, you don't want to be slightly faster than your opponent. You either want to be really fast and your opponent to be slow, or you want to be the one that's one step slower than your opponent, which makes a lot of sense when you think about how Magic works and operates with the mana curve and the gradually increasing power level of cards. So, how do I change my position on the axis of aggression during sideboarding? Well, I'm not even talking about like switching all the colors. You could decide which cards to put in your deck for game 1, and usually it's just about power level. But in game 2, you can decide, well, my 5 and 6 drops aren't going to beat my opponent's deck. My opponent's late game is too good for that to happen. So I'm just going to run all my 1, 2, and 3 drops and hope to get there. Maybe a falter effect, maybe a tap all your creatures effect that otherwise wouldn't have been part of your plan because you were relying on your late game, but now you're facing a deck whose late game is just superior. And the same thing applies in reverse. If you're playing a semi-aggro matchup, you might find some defensive cards in your sideboard that could help a lot. For example, if you're playing a red-green mirror with Intimidate guys and like 4/4 fatties and whatnot, you might want to bring in that Wall of Fire just because it blocks the red Intimidate creatures, it blocks the green 4/4s, and the price of running it in a sideboarded game is not really there because you already know that you aren't going to be the aggressor in the matchup, at least not during the whole duration of the game. All right, so if you ever manage to put yourself into a better position on the aggression versus control axis, that's definitely an advantage. All right, last but not least, sideboarding against opponents. Now, I already cited Kenji Tsumura. I'm gonna cite, I think it's Matt Sperling now, and he taught me something, not in person, but he made it apparent to me how valuable it could be. And I'm not saying that he invented the strategy, the tactic, or anything. It's the fact that your opponent will also prepare for the cards in your deck, and you might switch things around during sideboarding so that your opponent is caught off guard. And of course, the other sideboarding plans already work in that regard, but the one example that I have in mind here is to switch the amount and the type of combat tricks that you're running around. Often you will pick up a couple of combat tricks, not all of which you want to play, and then you might have shown your opponent a Ranger's Guile and a Titanic Growth in the first game, and these are the only combat tricks in your deck, for example. So what happens if you now bring in a Crowd's Favor and suddenly have that card when your opponent might be thinking, well, he showed me these green combat tricks that all cost mana, and now he's there with a Convoke spell that gives first strike. So if you have the luxury to have, let's say, replaceable combat tricks, and you've shown some of them to your opponent, you might get a huge payoff from switching these cards around, assuming that your opponent is not playing on a rather high level and has all these cards in mind that you played last game. The same applies for counter magic. Counter magic is already a pretty great tool to maybe not beat more powerful decks, but to have a shot against more powerful decks. Either you get a dominating board position and protect it long enough with counter magic, or you just have the counter magic for the very few spells that are an issue in your opponent's deck. Often you're facing a deck that's weaker than yours, except for 2 or 3 cards maybe. So then counter magic is absolutely phenomenal. In fact, counter magic is pretty good in limited anyway. If you can afford the tempo disadvantage that it often means by keeping up the mana. So if you sideboard against opponents, how do things like Force Spike, Rune Boggle, Dissipate, any kind of counter that also like gives you a small advantage can be huge, because your opponent might be living in fear. So if you counter your opponent's spell in game 1 with a what is it called, Stymied Hopes, for example, you might actually decide to take it out for game 2, because your opponent will be on the play and might even play around it, hoping to strand it in your hand, and it's not even there anymore, it's in your sideboard. All right, I could keep talking about this for a very long time, but I don't want to overdo it. This is Simon Says 77, and you're going to watch an M15 draft commented by yours truly. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show.
Do you love to play Magic Online but have a tight budget? Check out Mtgo Academy's Academy Budget Bot in the Magic Online Classifieds. All cards in stock are cheaper than one event ticket.
It is time to draft M15 again. And I already see a Triplicate Spirits. I hope you aren't tired of seeing this card yet. There's Isan, the Wonder Bard, Feast on the Fallen Meteorite, Paragon, Green Paragon. Some commons. All of these cards are weaker than Triplicate Spirits, so pretty much forced to take it here. I like Isan, but it's actually not that strong in limited, I think. I've seen Feast on the Fallen do some pretty nice things, like unexpectedly nice things, but it's not a card that I want to start my draft off with, and there's a Triplicate Spirit, so not much to say here. Hoarding Dragon in the pack and an uncommon missing. Now I have no clue what that uncommon could be, but seeing a Hoarding Dragon in Core Set Limited makes me very happy. I'm gonna pick that, and I don't think it's a close decision. Alright, so one thing we have to be careful about is if my right neighbor first picked Cone of Flame and is now cutting me from red, that could mean that the Hoarding Dragon is going to end up in the sideboard in the end, ultimately. So Garruk's Wake is a bit too expensive, I think. Spending 9 mana on a spell in limited is really, really ambitious. I wouldn't pick it early, and I wouldn't want to have it in my deck. I like Turn to Frog as a way to deal with almost anything in the format, and the white options here are solid as well. Heliod's Pilgrim and Oreskos Swiftclaw are both playable and well, at least solid. I also like Fester Gloom. I think that black decks in the format really want Fester Glooms. So I'm going to take Turn to Frog here, going with my overall strategy of just sticking to powerful cards in the early picks of the draft, as that is going to give me the best knowledge of how to continue. There's a Dauntless River Marshal, and I have a solid shot at going blue-white here. And yeah, no red signals, which could mean that there's a Cone of Flame in the draft. Solid but unexciting cards in other colors. So Dauntless River Marshal, I think, a pretty easy pick here. And of course now I'm a lot more interested in going the white-blue route. Still, I can't make this work just because I want it to. The cards need to be there. So Heliod's Pilgrim is an option. It's not particularly good in blue-white, but it's solid. I don't like to pick up Ephemeral Shields too early. I want to know how my deck looks like first. And the alternatives are Venom Sliver or Covenant of Blood. Covenant of Blood is just a really solid black removal spell. And Venom Sliver is, well, a nice ground creature to have, ground defense creature to have. I'm actually not sure what the pick should be here. I really want to know if Heliod's Pilgrim is good or not before I take it. And I actually think that Covenant of Blood is sufficiently stronger than the other options that I'm not too unhappy to move into a fourth color here. And that's also because I'm kind of thinking that Hoarding Dragon is most likely not going to end up in my deck from the signals that I've been getting. So here there's two black cards that are in contention. I think that Black Cat is better than Child of Night in this format. There's also a Welkin Turn, and yeah, I mean, if you can make it work in this format, having cheap evasive threats is the way to go. I think it's better than Gargoyle Sentinel, it's better than Hushwing Griff, and I'm not a fan of Sign and Blood in this format. I'm going to go with Welkin Turn here, leaving myself the option of going white-blue, blue-black, and as I've said, the red doesn't seem to be there. Dissipate is an option, and Coral Barrier, I think, is the alternative. My deck looks to be somewhat aggressive, so I'm not going to go for any kind of Fester Glooms. Even if I end up in black, it looks to be to support a blue or white aggressive strategy. Coral Barrier is better than Dissipate, I think. On the other hand, I'm happy to have one Dissipate in my blue decks pretty much no matter what. I'm still going to go with the Coral Barrier here. It just fits kind of nicely with both Triplicate Spirits and Covenant of Blood, so I'm hopeful that I can make things work. So here there's Krenko's Enforcer if I want to maybe keep my options for red open, or the Sign in Blood if I want to dip into black a little more. Now, as I've said, I'm not the biggest fan of card draw in aggressive decks, and the mana issues or the mana cost of Sign in Blood is also quite prohibitive. I've said that I think that Cone of Flame might have been drafted to my right, but such a late Krenko's Enforcer makes me think that I might have a shot at going for red cards this draft. There's the Marked by Honor, which I would probably pick if I had picked Heliod's Pilgrim, but looking at the cards so far, I don't really think that white is open, which is always the danger with first picking Triplicate Spirits. Now, I could try to draft Feast on the Fallen, which I really want to do at some point. Could also be very conservative and pick Typhoid Reds here. In either case, my deck is pretty much a mess with regards to the colors that I've drafted so far. I'm going to go with the Feast on the Fallen here. I think it has the highest upside if I end up in a strong Welkin Turn deck, for example. Alright, Black Cat is wheeling. I'm going to take that. And even a Fester Gloom. So do I want this card? Doesn't fit what I'm trying to do too well, but I still have the option of going black-red, where it's actually fine. I don't like Encrust very much anyway, so I'm going to take the Fester Gloom here. Eternal Thirst is very unexciting. Unmake the Graves is so-so. It really depends on your deck if you want an Unmake the Graves in your deck. Let's just take it and see. Okay, I think I'm just drafting the Black Cat deck. Nothing else seems to be open, so let's see where this leads us. It looks like it leads us into the Void. Or maybe to a Siege Dragon? No. Now, looking at this pack, there's a lot of power, but some of it is not in a color that I want to pursue. For example, Kurt Chieftain is out of the question. Raise the Alarm, I don't think should be it. I Have picked up 2 strong white cards, but not really seen anything. The Glacial Crasher doesn't really count, so currently I think I'm most likely to play black with either blue or red. I wanted to try out the Feast on the Fallen deck for a long time, and that would pretty much mean that I should take Carrion Crow here and try to wheel the Feast on the Fallen, which I'm pretty sure it will. The problem is that Into the Void as a card is just so much stronger than Carrion Crow that I would give up too much if I end up in blue. So I'm gonna take Into the Void here. I think it's one of the strongest cards in this pack, even though the pack is pretty stacked. So now there's Appeal from Reality, which isn't horrible. Also a Typhoid Rats just as a cheap early play. And Crippling Blight, which I actually kind of like. It kills very important creatures in the format. And it could actually be better than Typhoid Rats. I think the Death Touch is not as good in this format because most creatures are so small. So, and that also makes Crippling Blight better, of course. I could also discard Black Cats to Necromancer Stockpile to create zombie tokens. Haven't tried that ever, but I don't think I'm going to. I'm going to take Crippling Blight. I think it's just better than Typhoid Rats in this format. Here there's another Sign in Blood, which I'm passing because there is a Flash to Dust in the pack. So right now, even if I don't know exactly where I'm going, Flash to Dust makes me happy. And I think it's going to be black-blue, and that the table is heavily drafting red and white, which means that these picks are probably not going to work out. There's a Covenant of Blood here, but also a Jerubai Merc Lurker, which kind of fits perfectly into what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to take that, passing some evasive cards once again, but very happy to see this. It's not likely that somebody else at the table wants it, but I don't want to take any risks, and I'm taking another one. Alright, so now I have the option to take another Coral Barrier, which is actually not that great. Playing against islands, it gets better. Playing against non-evasive cheap creature decks, it's very good, but it also sometimes just doesn't do anything. I really like Shadowcloak Vampire, and I wouldn't mind an expensive threat in this kind of deck. Also, a card with a high power makes the Merc Lurkers a lot better. So I already have a Coral Barrier. I want a fatty at this point. Alright, another Flash to Dust. I'm just taking that. There's a Crickling, but not super impressed by this card. Sometimes it gets your opponent really well, but I mean, Flash to Dust is just really, really good. So here, I have the option of taking a Wall of Frost, which I might just do. It pretty much stops any ground aggression in its tracks. I have a Research Assistant here, which is also kind of nice if you want the games to go longer. But I've been very impressed by Wall of Frost. Basically every time I've played it in any core set, but even in this one where you would think that creatures are so small, it just means players are less likely to attack you. Alright, Feast on the Fallen and Carrion Crow. Now, to be honest, I think that Black Cat, Carrion Crow, and Nimbus of the Alps are all going to be better than Feast on the Fallen. I already have one here, and I'm not even sure if I'm going to run it. I kind of want to take the cheaper flyer rather than the Nimbus, just because curve is so important in this format. I want to try this out. I already have, even without this, I have 3 5-drops, and I don't think you really want too many of them. Here, Typhoid Rats is still better than Necromancer Stockpile. And that's about the time that I'm willing to pick up a Sign in Blood. None of these other cards matter, or should matter, and this puts us in a pretty good position to head into Pack 3, with our deck really turning into quite the controlling build. But I might just still run the Feast on the Fallen depending on how the next pack goes. Well, I certainly can't complain. There's an Indulgent Tormentor, also the Lightning Strike that kills it. But of course, an awesome pickup here. Still some cards I would like to see on the wheel. Welcome Turn, Accursed Spirit, Endless Obedience even. But yeah, clearly taking the rare here. And sometimes it's just really easy. Gravedigger is awesome with cards like Indulgent Tormentor and the Merc Lurkers. Also, Paragon of Gathering Mist is not going to be amazing in this build, so pretty easy Gravedigger here. Oh, look at this. Either Spouts, a card that I've lost to occasionally. Kind of sad to pass the Kite Fins, which I also think are pretty good, but Either Spouts in conjunction with 2 Flash to Dust is going to leave my opponents guessing, and it's another answer to token armies, which you really, really want to have. Here it's Welkin Turn or Carrion Crow. Now, the amount of 3-drops I have is already quite huge, and Welkin Turn I think is still good in this format. Even in the control-ish decks, you are never unhappy to have a turn 2 Welkin Turn. So what you're less happy about is Child of Night, I think, because it just gets blocked so easily that it's never going to have the kind of impact that you want it to have. Zethrid's Slyblade is an option, Sign in Blood is an option, Nimbus of the Alps is an option, and even Avarice Amulet I think wouldn't be completely horrendous. It is a bit risky, of course, but it's a powerful equipment, and if your opponent doesn't have the removal, you run away with the game. I really like the amulet here. I'm gonna take that. I think it's a bit underrated. Shield of the Avatar I'm not such a huge fan of, so I'm gonna leave that to somebody else. I think my pick here is Covenant of Blood. I like Rotfeaster Maggot, but my deck doesn't need more 5-drops, I think. So I'd rather have a life gain spell that also kills a creature. Flesh to Dust is awesome. 3 Flesh to Dust is great, of course. Oh wow, and all the cards are wheeling. Now, as much as I like Feast on the Fallen with all these Welkin turns, I might simply not have the space in my deck to run it. I do have space to run all these Welkin turns, and I think they are better than a Curse Spirit in a deck with a curve like mine. So I'm taking a 3rd Welkin turn. And maybe a 4th Welkin turn. Now, having too many of these is a bit of a problem if you ever want to block. But all my other cards block if I want that to be the case. So I actually don't mind the 4th Welkin turn here. Giving my deck a very concise game plan, I think. Alright. There's the Kite Fins. I think now that how my deck has developed, it's actually going to be too expensive to be put into my deck. I can build a very low curve deck now that makes sure to get onto the board turns 1 to 3 and then has only a very few great follow-ups to work with. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to build a pretty sweet black-blue aggro tempo deck out of this. Alright. Alright, let's see how we built this deck. There's a lot of cards here, 33, so I need to cut 10-ish, and I have a lot of power, so I can definitely get rid of a lot of these cards. Now, it's already only 17 creatures, which might mean that I primarily have to cut spells here, which it definitely looks like. Now, I don't think that I need to play cards like Blood Host. And the other creatures look very solid to me. I'm not thrilled about Black Cat, but it's never going to be completely awful. So if I want to have a solid amount of creatures, then I should probably only play the best cards in my spell slots. Now, Fester Gloom is not great with 4 Welkin turns. Mind Rot is not great. I like Crippling Bite and Turn to Frog. I think it might be possible that Sign in Blood is not making it. And Avarice Amulet also looks a bit too risky for this kind of build, or unnecessarily risky, let's put it that way. I love these 5-drops, and I kind of think that Covenant of Blood is close to uncuttable in a deck like this. So Feast on the Fallen has to go. I would have loved to try it, but I just don't see it working in this configuration. Now, I already said that I like the Kite Fins, and I think Shadowcloak Vampire is just a very efficient creature, so I'm not looking to cut any of these. I also like how Wall of Frost works together with the Vulcan turn, so I like that I have the evasion plus all the ground defense in the world. So overall, I think that Sign in Blood probably just has to go. And then it might also be just necessary to cut the Covenant of Bloods as well. If I have all these high impact spells here in the 4/5 drops and the Into the Void, it might actually not be necessary to play a 7 mana Convoke spell. That's not even great because I want to continue attacking with my creatures. And it doesn't help against Triplicate Spirits anyway. So I think this is probably the best way to build this deck. And you could not run Crippling Blight, but a Sign in Blood instead, for example, just to have a bit more of a late game. So I'm not 100% sure that I want 2 Black Cats in this kind of build because my ground defenses are actually pretty good. So what I could do would be to only rely on Welkin turn for turn 2 and then rely on my 4 of my 5/3 drops to hold down the fort to prevent me from dying early on. So I'm not sure if that makes Sign in Blood actually better, or if I'm just a bit too concerned and want to have, well, more cards to reduce the variance of the starting hands and draw steps and so on. I'm never unhappy to cast a Sign in Blood if I'm on 3 life or more. It's just not clear if this deck is likely to flood. I already have quite a lot of late game cards, but depending on which part of my deck I draw, I might just have like all these kind of 1/1s, and then I'm going to be really unhappy about having drawn multiple Black Cats. Especially if a card like the Murklurker or Wall of Frost is pretty much enough to hold down the fort against, let's say, a normal deck, a regular deck. Alright, I've convinced myself to just go for the early beatdown, ground defense, and then 5 and 6 drop plan that kind of wants the 2 Sign in Bloods to keep going. And now I think I should have the early, the mid, and the late game covered, with a bit of a danger of getting overrun depending on the matchup if I don't hit any of my good 3 drops to block with. But this is something that I can easily sideboard accordingly depending on what my opponent does. So I'm going to combine these groups, look at my mana, and probably run 1 more Swamp just for the double black. It doesn't mean that Welkin turn gets a bit weaker, but at least if I draw double Swamp and a Sign in Blood, I'm going to keep. If I draw double Island and no Swamp, I probably have to mulligan. So 1 more Swamp it's going to be. Magic Online agrees, always a great sign. And that's it. Let's see how that works out.
If you'd like to exchange your Magic Online cards for event tickets while logged in on Magic Online, you can do so by trading MTGO Academy's official bot, Academy Buy Bot. You can find it in the Magic Online trading area or add it to your buddy list.
Time for round 1 here with an interesting hand on the draw. I have a Typhoid Rats to play, and if I draw lands or an island, then I can Welkin turn into Murklurker, and then I have a couple of 5-drops, but the fact that I have 3 of them means that I really need to draw lands to make this hand work. I'm gonna mulligan to 6. And I like this hand better, but clearly this one needs a lot more late game spells to really work out. So I have the Typhoid Rats and the Crippling Blight for early defense. I have a weak hand against Forge Devil, so I'm not running out the Typhoid Rats. Don't want to give my opponent the on-curve play if I don't have to. Now I could just Crippling Blight the Generator Servant. That seems better than running out Typhoid Rats here. I want to trade the Typhoid Rats for something larger anyway. And I still don't allow the Forge Devil at this stage. Could have played a Swamp there if I draw into Sign in Blood. That would probably have been better. So yeah, this is awesome. Invasive Species, setting my opponent back a turn. And of course meaning that I'm gonna run out the rats here. Oh, even better, a Wall of Frost. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much a no-brainer. Wall of Frost against their green-red opponent that has just bounced his third land drop is going to be phenomenal. It does lose against Titanic Growth. So if my opponent attacks here, it kind of has to be Titanic Growth. Okay, Inferno Fist also works. Yeah, not much I can do about that. So the Inferno Fist also deals with the Typhoid Rats. If I block here, I effectively save myself 5 damage. The Invasive Species stays tapped for a turn, and the Fist is gone. I think that's a trade I'm willing to make. I don't love giving my opponent the perfect use of his mana for this turn, but I also can't overvaluate the Wall of Frost here. It's already giving me quite a bit of value. And all this value is going to be good as I draw into more lands and hopefully Sign in Bloods and my powerful 5 drops. I did delay the Typhoid Rats by another turn, still to play around Forge Devil a little bit. And because I knew that the Invasive Species wasn't going to attack this turn. Life's Legacy, wow. Sacrifice a 3/3 and draw 3 cards. I'm not sure if that is actually a good exchange for my opponent. Here we go. Now my cheap creatures come to the party. Typhoid Rats could be pretty good against Generator Servant here if my opponent was planning to ramp out something huge. Still going to block. The rats are just somewhat likely to die. And I have the turn to frog at some point to hopefully just dominate a card like Charging Rhino. Okay. Still only going down to 16. It really matters what my opponent has here now as his next play. This is another fatty, then I might be in trouble. If it's only the Rhino and maybe a 1 or 2 drop, then I think I'm fine. Invasive Species number 2 is a good card for my opponent, but nothing unbeatable. Ether Spouts, alright. Just gonna cast that. Even if I hit only 2 creatures, that's still a very good exchange for me, of course. And I haven't really been representing this card, so I think it's not unlikely that we see an attack with both creatures here. And we do. Could have delayed this Ether Spouts by another turn, but I'm kind of hoping to draw into Sign in Blood, maybe some removal spell. Charging Rhino on top, Invasive Species on the bottom. All right. This deck has a lot of Invasive Species. Alright, the Welkin turn beat down. Now it's a race. And hopefully I can draw into one of my Merc Lurkers to swing that race in my favor. I'm going to take 3 here, and my opponent is playing the Rhino, which is pretty clearly what's going to happen. And I'm fine if I draw any of my 5 drops. Sign in Blood should be good. Yeah, there's a lot of good cards I can draw here. Yeah, Flesh to Dust, great. I think I'm just casting that on the Rhino. See no reason to delay it. If my opponent has a Ranger's Guile or draws into one, it's already pretty bad. So 10 to 10. I'm currently dealing more damage in the race, but my opponent has 7 mana. 3 cards. Siege Worm or something like that. Hornet Queen. Okay, I think I can't beat that. Yeah, this card is ridiculously good. Don't see anything I can do about that. Siege Worm would have been bad, but Hornet Queen looks unbeatable in this kind of spot. My opponent is very conservative here. I'm not going to block. I don't think that I'm going to win if I block. But to be fair, I don't think that I'm going to win, so... Okay, so now we see why there's so many invasive species and roaring Primodoxes. Because my opponent has a Hornet Queen and wants to just go crazy with it. Also, the Generator Servant looks a lot more threatening now. I need some very good cards to deal with this Hornet Queen. I think first of all I need to be able to Fester Gloom, even if it only... well, even if it kills most of my own creatures. I could try to kill my opponent before these kind of cards become active. And Covenant of Blood also deals with pretty much all the aggressive cards my opponent has shown me. So that's definitely an option. Mind Rotting is an option, but not as good against all the Generator Servants, so I have to be careful about that. And yeah, that's pretty much what my sideboard allows here. Maybe even the Statute of Denial. Countering the Queen has to be one of my best ways of dealing with it. So, given what I know, it seems best to kind of transform into a control deck that really needs to make sure that Hornet Queen doesn't resolve, or that I have a Fester Gloom and even something to kill the 2/2 before my opponent goes crazy with the invasive species and so on. So how would the control version of this deck look like? Not sure if I even want Into the Void in this kind of build. So it's probably going to look something like this, with not a lot of creatures, a lot of spells, and several ways of dealing with Hornet Queen. Now the blue is reduced to only the bare minimum, which I think I'm fine with. Turn to Frog wasn't great, but if I have a Fester Gloom in my deck, I pretty much always want the Turn to Frog. And I might also want the Avarice Amulet. Just putting it on a card like Wall of Frost could win me the game. Well, it does something that other cards in my deck are just not capable of. So I kind of like that as well. I have a feeling that I could try to Mind Rot my opponent's Hornet Queen out of his hand. Mind Rot is such a bad top deck. Now, Capshaw Kite Fins is also not phenomenal. On the other hand, I have Into the Void in my sideboard right now, and Into the Voiding invasive species is also a pretty good play, but it doesn't fit into my overall plan here. I guess that the Kite Fins are ultimately going to be better than playing a card like Black Cat or whatever. So yeah, this is going to be the I'm trying to beat Hornet Queen build of my deck. I'm going to play first. And I'm forced to mulliganing, and I have an island and 2 Sign in Blood, so that's not an option. Alright, this looks better. Keeping. And starting off with a Swamp in case I draw into Sign in Blood. So I do like that I have Carrion Crow into Wall of Frost, or maybe even Wall of Frost into Avarice Amulet to get things going as soon as possible. And a Murklurker, that's also nice to see. So my overall game plan is just going to be to ride the Amulet to victory. Netcaster Spider is fine. This time I'm not gonna lose the Wall of Frost so carelessly. Alright, now that my opponent has the Spider, it's even more clear that I should run out the Murklurker here. I'm losing it to a well-timed Inferno Fist, but I think that's the only card that's an issue right now. And then Wall of Frost is still going to be great if I draw an island. The Amulet hopefully will do things as soon as I draw a land. And I even have a play for next turn, so I think I'm fine. Yeah, this is once again pretty much the worst case, except if I draw an island, then it's fine. Not an island, another Murklurker, so I could try to double block the Spider, which doesn't seem horrible. If my opponent doesn't attack, then I'll also know that things are okay. And it's kind of difficult for green-red to deal with my 4 toughness creature when I block with it. If my opponent has a Stoke the Flames, I guess I'm getting 2 for 1, and my chances of winning the game are significantly lower. That's pretty much the only card that I can think of that would actually punish at the double block that effectively. Like Gather Courage, for example. I guess if my opponent also sacrifices their Inferno Fist, 2 for 1s me, but not 2 for 1s, 2 for 2s me with a huge tempo swing. Titanic Growth, yeah, there's a couple of cards. It's just the question of if I can afford to play around them. Okay, my opponent doesn't attack, so I'm happy. Still no lands, I'm not happy about that, but let's play a Carrion Crow. If my opponent wants to trade the Inferno Fist for the Crow, happy that they are gone. Inferno Fist, okay, happy that it is gone. 6 mana, so already only 1 mana short of potentially dropping a Hornet Queen, with Elvish Mystic providing the mana needed. If had I drawn a Fester Gloom here, I would have had a pretty nice attack, potentially, but I didn't. So, I could Covenant of Blood. Just don't think that Covenanting the Netcaster Spider when my opponent has open red mana is a good play. Now, I almost think that I should run out the Amulet, because Wall of Frost doesn't do anything on this board. I'm still risking that my opponent has something to let the Spider punch through, though. Generator Servant also giving haste to a large ground creature, potentially. Yeah, I'm going to play the Wall of Frost. If my opponent just gives haste to, what's it called, Crashing Rhino, and I can't block, that's kind of awkward. Or even Siege Worm. And if it's Hornet Queen, well, then I'm going to kill the Hornet Queen, and I somehow have to grind through the 1/1 Death Touch creatures. No place would be a very welcome sight here. Alright, no place. And a counterspell. So the Amulet is going to be very expensive. The counterspell is going to be awesome. And I also have the Covenant of Blood, which I don't really want to cast here. So what I could do is just play nothing, because I have the counter spell. But on the other hand, I want to counter the Hornet Queen really badly. So why is my opponent not casting anything? That's an interesting question. I think I have to pass here. Even if the statue doesn't get the Hornet Queen, I feel very favored in this matchup if the game goes longer. Except if my opponent resolves Hornet Queen and starts bouncing it. Or even just resolving it is already a problem, already an issue. Yeah, it looks like my opponent just doesn't really have anything, but, well, I'm not casting anything either, so I guess that's fine. Invasive Species is not a strong play on this board. Returning Inferno Fist, I guess, to not be forced to hold up a red mana all the time. Maybe also trying to suit up Invasive Species again, which kind of was the plan last game to kill my Wall of Frost, and that worked out pretty beautifully. But now I have the two Murklurkers that are just always threatening a double block. And I am going to double block if I get the chance, so... Alright, that's also fine. In this kind of game where I'm not casting anything, it would be really, really good to draw lands rather than spells. Also, my opponent should know that he's under some pressure here. If I'm sitting here with six spells in my hand against his 3, then he either needs to resolve Hornet Queen or start being more aggressive than what he's doing. Now I even have the Flash to Dust available, which is a good start. Okay, charging Rhino, I let resolve because I have Flash to Dust open. And I'm just gonna cast it here. I need to spend my mana a little bit. Crippling Blight. So I could put this on Netcaster Spider to let my Carrion Crow attack, and then my opponent can use his Inferno Fist if he wants. Doesn't seem like a great use of Crippling Blight, but at least I get to do something with my turn. So I think, yeah, just being able to start attacking for 2, I think is worth it. And if I trade the Inferno Fist for Carrion Crow, I think I'm also fine. I kind of want to get my opponent's removal capabilities out of his hand, given that I want to Avarice Amulet at some point. Plummet. Alright. That's also fine. I guess the Crippling Bite is kind of weak if my opponent has another invasive species or the Roaring Primadox. Didn't consider that when making my decision. So yeah, that might have been a slight mistake. Indulgent Tormentor. So I can cast the Tormentor. I'm tapped out, and then my opponent gets to do whatever he's been sitting on. Potentially killing the Tormentor also. And I don't have counter magic up. I'm taking 1 each turn. And it's getting more and more likely that I'm going to be forced to use the statue on something that I don't necessarily want to kill. So I think I'm playing the Tormentor here. If my opponent has like a 1 damage burn spell in conjunction with Inferno Fist, or a 3 or 4 mana 4 damage burn spell, I'm losing the Tormentor. But from my draws, it just hasn't appeared like I'm going to be able to hold up Counter Magic plus the Tormentor anytime soon. Yeah, so this is trading with a 6 mana removal spell. I also have a Gravedigger in my deck, so that's definitely something to consider. Invasive Species is still not attacking here, so my opponent can't have too much. If my opponent also drops the Hornet Queen here, then it was just really well played by my opponent. Okay, if my opponent drops a Wall of Fire, then I'm at least not unhappy about how the game went. I'm gonna tap out once again to start the Amulet. Now, if the Wall of Frost survives this, I think I'm pulling ahead in the game with the help of the extra card each turn. And there isn't too much my opponent can do if he doesn't draw Hornet Queen this turn. What I can't do is block with Wall of Frost, clearly. Okay, things are working out very nicely here. No attacks by invasive species, for example, which could signal a trick. It would have been difficult for me to block even. Double blocking, risking like a Titanic Growth or something like that. So now I think I'm in a position to never tap out of counter mana again, because every turn that goes by is favoring me, even if I take 1 each turn. I think taking 1 from Venom Sliver and drawing a card in the process is a very good exchange for me. I should probably hold back a land at some point so that I have a way to discard something into the Statute of Denial. So I have a Fester Gloom now. It kills Elvish Mystic, Generator Servant, and Venom Sliver, and my creatures are still out of range of anything scary. I'm just casting that because I have nothing else to do. That looks like a pretty solid exchange here. Not taking any more damage. My Amulet is still working overtime. Actually, my opponent even has the Blast Fire Bolt to get rid of it, but I guess that's even worse than just killing the creature, because you would get control of the Amulet instead. 7 mana right now. If I play a land, I have 8. I also have a Sign in Blood, so I think right now it's more important to have the lands in play, because it's very likely that I'm going to start casting cards like Covenant of Blood and then getting in for damage. I could actually kill invasive species with Covenant of Blood. Let's see, I have 8 mana, so I want to tap 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm basically tapping out to do that, but my opponent has 1 card in hand, so by doing that I kind of make sure that I'll be able to win the game pretty soon. And this Inferno Fist is not really doing anything scary. If this deals 2 to me, which it does, I'm going to 10 and then up to 14. My opponent can attack me for 1, which isn't exactly punishing for me for my play. There's the invasive species, so it's coming down at a point where I can't kill the Netcaster Spider, so my opponent is getting a little bit of value here. But if I counter, I'm really just exposing myself to Hornet Queen, which seems unnecessary. But what I could do is turn to Frog the Spider. Don't think my opponent also has Hornet Queen at this point. That would be a really interesting sequence. Can turn to Frog the Spider and it's just dead. Then the invasive species still stops my creatures. Yeah, that's just not necessary. No need to take such a risk. If turn to Frog still basically kills whatever my opponent does. Either spouts even. So now I have another backup against Hornet Queen, which is important. 9 mana means I can spend 6 here. Maybe for another Covenant. I really want to get attacking, but that's not easy against Wall of Fire. It's almost impossible, in fact. So if I cast Signbot, I'm discarding. That's also not great. 1 mana short of the Kite Fins. Maybe I'm just passing the turn again. And then at the end of turn, I'm probably going to spend a removal spell on Netcaster Spider so that my Kite Fins can attack next turn. It's not like I'm short on removal spells or anything. Oh, probably should have left open double blue here. And there's the Gravedigger even, so I can get back the Tormentor if I want to. But Kite Fins is the play that I'm going to make first. Quite aggressive here, but the invasive species can only block one of my creatures. I have 12 cards in my library. I kind of need to make sure that I'm not getting decked. So being as aggressive as possible seems smart. I'm also not losing to anything that my opponent has here. Can even prevent decking with either spouts. Doesn't sound like a great plan, but it's possible. Counterflame, so that might be the person that picked, what's it called? That picked Counterflame and passed the Hoarding Dragon. The reason I'm countering here is that I really just want to finish this game, pretty much. And I know now that my opponent has no cards in hand, and I'm somewhat safe from Hornet Queen. It would still be a great card, of course. I think it's just better to start attacking here. Okay, what's going on? I want to return Indulgent Tormentor, so draw a card. I don't even know if I want to draw cards. That's interesting. I might want to get Carrion Crow instead. I will actually do that. No real need to risk getting decked anymore than I already am. And I'm also not gonna risk putting Avarice Amulet on another creature. Also seems unnecessary. If my opponent doesn't draw Hornet Queen this turn, I think I'm just killing him or her. I also have 6 damage here. Yeah, Generator Servant is not enough. So tapping down all my opponent's ground creatures seems kind of unnecessary. I'm getting in for 7 here. And then Sign in Blood is going to finish my opponent off. Could have also cast the Covenant, wouldn't really have mattered. Okay, so it's not only Hornet Queen, but also Covenant of Blood. Yep, no problem. Mind Rot maybe? I think my sideboarding worked out really well. I don't have a lot in my deck that my opponent can punish with a card like Cone of Flame. I guess Indulgent Tormentor is kind of the most scary card to have there. Let's see. Chrono Stutter, I don't think that's something I want. Yeah, these cards are not great. Could play a Black Cat rather than the Crippling Blight, which wasn't amazing, especially because putting it on the Spider just so that my opponent can return it seems kind of weak. It's a cheap early play to stop early aggression by my opponent, though. I really think that Mind Rot is looking better and better, given how many powerful cards my opponent has and how much tempo he loses by balancing his own stuff. I think Mind Rot should be in the deck. Last but not least, I probably have to cut the Crippling Blight. I mean, Turn to Frog is also not amazing in this matchup, but I think it's better. Alright, on the draw, not a great hand, but I think it's keepable. Opponent also on 7. Let's see if this is turn 1 Elvish Mystic, that's really good. So the Sign Blood on the draw is a bit weaker, clearly. And Statue of Denial is not the card that I wanted to see. I wanted to draw into Fester Gloom, Wall of Frost, these kind of cards. My opponent has no plays and doesn't attack with Elvish Mystic. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Nothing, it seems like. Maybe just missed a point of damage there. No attacks once again. So is this going to be a 4-drop on turn 3? I have several ways of dealing with early aggression. Roaring Primadox is also kind of risky for my opponent. If I have a Fester Gloom here next turn, for example, or the Crippling Blight, which I might have boarded out. Tormentor. Well, not great, but I just have to hope that the tempo disadvantage of having such an early Primadox comes back to bite my opponent. And if I had the removal spell for the Mystic, then my opponent would have been in real trouble. This game really depends on... Oh, what's happening now? After blockers, Titanic Growth? Very interesting. So still a removal spell on Elvish Mystic is pretty good. Mind Rot, not so much, but on the other hand, also not horrible. It's also kind of the only card that I can cast, except if I want to cast Statue of Denial. I think I have to try to statue my opponent's next creature play and just get him that way. Make him return the Mystic, counter the Mystic, hope that my opponent doesn't have another play, and yeah, kind of time walk my opponent multiple times. It's not super likely, but it's possible. Opponent didn't have a cheap creature to play, otherwise wouldn't have cast Titanic Growth. And if he has a 5-drop, you might even cast the 5-drop, although that doesn't make any sense if you have an Elvish Mystic. Don't have a blue creature, sadly. That would be really good. Okay, that was a great turn of events. And the Swamp. That's awesome. So now my opponent is forced to return the Primadox to his hand. Takes 2 here. His next play can't be Hornet Queen. And I have an Indulgent Tormentor, which might or might not survive. And my Mind Rot could actually be good as well. I still don't think that I beat a Hornet Queen. But I'm not, like, I think I'm in the best possible position, so. Opponent doesn't cast anything. Probably going to sacrifice a creature here, or no, that doesn't even work, right? He can't choose to sacrifice a creature to have this work, so I'm getting an extra card. It's very nice of my opponent. And it also probably means that my opponent doesn't have a removal spell for the Tormentor. I mean, why would he give me an extra card? So I think the right play here is to pass the turn because I have the Flesh to Dust open. And Mind Rod wouldn't stop my opponent from doing anything that he wants to be doing anyway. I'm still losing to Hornet Queen, I think. But I have Covenant of Blood and Covenant of Blood to bring my opponent down to 1 from this position already. So this is the Hornet Queen, and it looks like it is. I just have to let that resolve. I kill the Hornet Queen, and then we'll see how my opponent deals with a Tormentor. That's kind of the plan, at least. Pays 3 life. I don't think that's a good idea, my friend. So I still don't think that Mind Rotting is the way to go, but I can attack with Carrion Crow. My opponent blocks, most likely. Then I Covenant of Blood. I could also just Covenant of Blood so that I have the Carrion Crow on defense. Don't think I'm losing to these 4 guys, especially after having cast the Covenant. There's really no reason to offer the exchange on my part, so let's Covenant here, going up to 12. I know that one of my opponent's card is the Roaring Primadox. That's not going to win my opponent the game. A removal spell on the Tormentor isn't going to win my opponent the game. And I'm very likely to just Covenant of Blood my opponent out of this game. Oh, that could be a Cone of Flame. Very nice. But now I even have the Sign in Blood to kill my opponent. So even if I don't have the land for Covenant of Blood here. Wow, what a game. Really, really great. Being able to beat Hornet Queen and Cone of Flame. Venom Sliver. And we got there, I think. Don't think there's anything my opponent can do. So let's burn him out. Yep, that's it. Not sure if the sideboarded deck was actually better than the first one. In this matchup, it certainly seemed that way because beating Cone of Flame and Hornet Queen without the sideboarding, I don't think would have worked out. Also, I don't think my opponent can believe that he lost with this kind of deck. The turn my opponent Titanic Growth made me not happy, but made me think that I had a shot against my opponent's start. Awesome. See you next round.
If you'd like to purchase Magic Online cards with event tickets while logged in on Magic Online, look at Mtgo Academy's selection by trading our official bot, Academy Sellbot. You can find it in the Magic Online trading area or add it to your buddy list.
Time for round 2 after this epic battle. I'm on the draw and I like my hand sufficiently that I'm going to keep it. I know that I have 2 card draw spots in my hand. I really want to hit 5 lands with this deck. So I don't think that having a 5 land opener is so bad. Also, the previous games I had quite a lot of mulligans or hands that were really unlikely to get there. So I'm happy that this hand offers a lot more. Especially with the Murklurker just being a 2/4 and the Turn to Frog hopefully providing the defense I need. Although to be fair, Turn to Frog is quite a lot weaker in this format than it has been in others. Casting it on a lot of the early drops in the format is just not very exciting. Oh, there's a Typhoid Rats. Still gonna run out the Lurker here. Don't think that my opponent can attack into it. If my opponent does, could be a sign of crowd's favor, and then I'll have to decide what to do. Okay, and no land and no place. Interesting. So next turn I could have Flesh to Dust up for this, and attacking is not actually something I want to be doing here. Getting Welkin Turn onto the board is great. Getting Typhoid Reds onto the battlefield is solid. And my opponent didn't have attacks last turn, so it's unlikely that there are going to be attacks next turn. I mean, I'm losing a creature to Forge Devil here, but that's not something I can prevent. Still no plays by my opponent. So the one card I'm thinking of is a card like Devouring Light, so I'm not going to expose the Murklurker. And this exchange looks great if it happens, so. There's the Crowd's Favor, so my opponent didn't attack. Interesting. So, the first idea in this spot for you might be to cast Flesh to Dust. But there's actually no reason to do that. With the Murklurker holding off the Swiftclaw just fine. The Swiftclaw is not really a card that I want to get rid of, and having the Typhoid Reds on the battlefield is almost, well, doesn't really matter to me. So I'm holding back the Flesh to Dust for something that really matters. Just imagine my opponent plays a Soul of Theros. I mean, that's a completely extreme example, but I think I'm just better off holding the Flesh to Dust for something that's really scary, rather than going unnecessary risks here. The card that I'm not playing around is Cone of Flame here. I'm going to drop another Welkin Turn, and if my opponent has Cone of Flame, all three of them are going to die. My last opponent had the Cone of Flame, so. Okay, Thundering Giant with haste can actually attack here. Not a big problem. And I even drew a land, so let's get some more life out of the deal here. And maybe even attack with the Lurker. Let's see, if my opponent double blocks there, I have a good turn to Frog, so yeah. Don't think that my opponent can double block, by the way. And if I deal 8 here, then the Welkin Turns are lethal next turn, which is a big plus. Okay, so I'm going to use the Turn to Frog. And yeah, give something else lifelink. I'm basically tapped out, so. No, it's not even clear if my opponent can attack with the Thundering Giant. Infernal Fist is nice, but it's probably not going to kill me. Looks like my opponent now has only the option to kill a Welkin Turn and hold back the Giant to make my Murklurker not able to attack. I also don't want to Flash to Dust just to deal more damage. Doesn't seem entirely necessary. Oh, even a Devouring Light. Wasn't expecting that. So that means I'm only bringing my opponent down to 6. And I will Gravedigger out another Welkin Turn. Oh, already tapped the mana. Okay. So if my opponent doesn't have Triplicate Spirits here, I'm in great shape. And even if he does, I have the Murklurker and the Gravedigger, which are tough to beat for my opponent. Probably should have Flesh to Dust it first. Yeah, didn't really think about this. So my opponent is on 6, so attacking with the 2 Welkin Turns is not great. Attacking with all of my creatures is kind of what I want to be doing. And it's stupid not to play the Flesh to Dust first, because my opponent might have Ephemeral Shields and something to deal with 1 Welkin Turn. But now that I've passed into this step, I'm going to attack with all and just try to Flesh to Dust. And that worked out. So yeah, it was a not played super tightly, but I noticed last match that I was also spending quite a lot of time, and I wanted to make sure that I have enough time to finish this one. So playing against white red, I only saw a single relevant spell, that was the Crowd's Favor, and a bunch of creatures that aren't really good, that are also particularly bad against Black Cat. So this might be a completely different matchup where I want to have the black aggro defense rather than the super late game beat Hornet Queen and Cone of Flame in the same game deck. So that would mean bringing in 2 Black Cats and a Fester Gloom, and funnily enough, I don't like the Covenant in a matchup where my opponent is so fast, or potentially so fast, because I'm going to be forced to trade my creatures, and then I won't have the mana for the Covenant of Blood. Or at least that's a danger. So if I bring in Black Cat, and Fester Gloom, I think that 3 Vulcan turns are once again the easy cut. I'm not in love with Typhoid Rats, but at least my opponent has shown the Thundering Giant. I could also take out Turn to Frog to keep in another Welkin turn, or maybe one of the Covenants, but no, I don't like that. So let's try it like this. I'm on the draw again. I need a land for the Black Cat, and the Fester Gloom looks amazing, but keeping a 1-lander with this kind of deck is just asking for trouble, I think. I love the Black Cat in this hand. I don't love the Into the Void if I'm struggling for mana early on, so I'm gonna mulligan. A lot of mulligans here. Not super happy about that. Let's try it with this hand. If I draw a Swamp, I could be fine. Yeah, this Into the Void looks kind of horrendous. I probably should have taken it out. But I don't have a lot of options when it comes to early defense that I don't already have in my deck. So, I mean, Into the Void still punishes maybe an Inferno Fist or just a clunky draw by my opponent. Yeah, Oriska Swiftclaw. Nothing clunky about that. There's Typhoid Rats, at least. Very important turn here. If my opponent doesn't play anything else, I'm in great shape. Heliod's Pilgrim is a bit of an issue. There's the Inferno Fist, so I can kind of expect my Typhoid Rats to die. Oh, Coral Barrier. Interesting. I think that's even better than Typhoid Rats. I mean, Inferno Fist alone isn't going to protect the Swiftclaw from anything. And if my opponent makes the Heliod's Pilgrim a 3-2, I think I'm in a good spot. Also, there hasn't been a second mountain yet. Swamp. That's interesting. That could mean... I don't even know. That could mean that my opponent is splashing for Nightfire Giant. That seems the most logical. Not planning to take additional damage here. I don't know what my opponent had here, but didn't see a reason not to block. There's a Fester Gloom, so not great against Gargoyle Sentinel, but if my opponent spends mana to deal 3 damage to me, I think I'm in a good spot. Now, this Inferno Fist could come down on the Sentinel, and then if my opponent also spends 3, I'm taking 5, but I get to untap into Flash to Dust, so that would be pretty punishing. I really want to Sign in Blood, just to dig deeper into my deck. That actually makes it a bit more likely that my opponent goes for a play like the one I described. So let's see what I find here. A Welkin turn. Well, Welkin turn is not a good combo with Fester Gloom. If I play that, I think I still play it. Now, it might seem weird, but I'm on 13, and the Welkin turn could potentially just chump block the Sentinel just to gain 5 life if my opponent really Inferno Fists it. If my opponent activates the Sentinel and hits me for 3, I have a pretty good Into the Void coming, and then I would want to have the Welkin turn in play anyway. So I'm not going to chump block for to prevent 3 here, of course. And there is something else going on. If I ever attack with Welkin turn into my opponent's 3 mana, because my opponent has decided that holding up the Sentinel is not viable anymore, then suddenly I can Fester Gloom away the Gargoyle Sentinel as well. It looks kind of nice to drop the Indulgent Tormentor here. But I don't know if it's just going to die to a Lightning Strike, and it would mean taking another 3 from Gargoyle Sentinel. By holding up Flesh to Dust, I make it a lot more difficult for my opponent to play this turn correctly, not exposing his Gargoyle to Flesh to Dust, and also to like not play his Inferno Fist, all these kind of things. There wasn't like the Indestructible spell would have been good here, but because my opponent didn't have it, I effectively time walked, and I'm setting up pretty nicely here. Playing the Kite Fins before the Tormentor allows me to play around a Lightning Strike. If my opponent has a Lightning Strike, he's very likely to kill the Kite Fins. And I'm not going to risk any additional points of damage. If the Squid is so good at holding off the Swift Claw that I'm not going to risk that. Oh, there's a Lightning Strike targeting me. Oh my. So targeting me, I'm really scared now. Inferno Fist is another 2, and then I'm on 5, so I might lose to Lava Axe next turn. Not that I can do anything about it. Oh, that's crazy. So I can Into the Void and attack for 6. My opponent goes to 10. Yeah, I have no way of killing my opponent. Clearly. I can drop the Tormentor, but the way my opponent is playing, like Lightning Strike me, Inferno Fist me, speaks a very clear language. And I can't do anything about a Lava Axe. The Lava Axe is just going to kill me. I don't really want to Into the Void the Pilgrim, because it might actually mean that my opponent draws into another Inferno Fist. Yeah, this is horrible. This is just really horrible. I think I'm getting burned out here, but I don't see what to do about it, or what to do against it. That Gargoyle Sentinel actually dealing me a few points of damage too many. But, I mean, if my opponent really has 10 points of burn, I don't have to be... yeah, I don't think that you need to like stay above 10 against the white-red deck, so... Yeah, I mean... losing to a triple Lightning Strike, I think, is acceptable. It's not something I'm happy about, but I don't think I took too much damage or anything. All right, good to know. Maybe I should bring in the Covenant of Bloods. If my opponent has so much removal, it's potentially just better to play very, very defensively and just try to survive somehow, and then not get burned out. That would be a good plan. Not getting burned out is a very good plan. So now that I know what my opponent has, I know that I really need to protect my life total. I have some key cards like the Murklurker that I need to draw. I think that Covenant of Blood has now gotten a lot better suddenly. Even the Blood Host doesn't look horrible anymore. It's going to be another creature that my opponent either has to deal with, or I get to pull ahead and my opponent is not going to be able to kill me. The one thing I'm not sure about is if I can keep the Sign in Bloods in my deck. They are kind of important to my overall strategy, even if they cost me life. It's not like I can just do nothing in the early turns and still expect to be favored in this matchup. For example, a card like Mind Rod is generally not going to be good against a white-red aggro deck. And Sign in Blood at least draws me into the cards that are going to be key in this matchup. I could take out the Turn to Frog. I think that's a pretty easy cut as well. And I I think having Into the Void in game 2 was already a mistake. So if I board like this, I have one more slot to fill. It could be the Blood Host and it could be the Mind Rod. Against the triple Lightning Strike deck, the Blood Host does have its problems, but casting Mind Rod is also ambitious. So I'm just, I guess I'm not happy about either, but I also think that the Welkin turn is pretty unplayable now that my opponent has shown his full 40 cards more clearly. I guess when in doubt, this is going to gain me life and is something that can ensure my late game. It's also a creature that can block, that can tap for Covenant of Blood, and yeah, my opponent has to respect. So let's play it this way. I want to play first, and this is a keepable hand, which is pretty much all I'm looking for. And this is a hand where you're just happy to see Sign in Blood, basically. If I don't draw Sign in Blood, I'm also not going to be in bad shape, but this is a hand that really just wants to trade 2 life for 2 cards. Also some nice synergy already. I have the early creatures, and hopefully we'll be able to play Covenant of Blood. What did I do here? I played the second Swamp, and that leaves me unable to play Wall of Frost. So I think because I talked about what's it called? Sign in Blood a bit too much. So that was just stupidity, I think. Also taking 5 here is very unfortunate. It's not clear if having the Wall of Frost would have been phenomenal, given that my opponent with his Inferno Fist basically trades for the wall. So now I got rid of the Swamp, which could be huge. And this might be a Devouring Light in the making. So the Carrion Crow can block the Borderland Marauder, and if that trade happens, I'm very happy. I really want to keep the Wall of Frost around if I can. If my opponent has the Devouring Light, then I'm pretty much losing it anyway. So if I block the Borderland Marauder with the Wall of Frost, then the Inferno Fist trades for Wall of Frost, which is kind of bad. Interestingly, though, the Forge Devil is also attacking, and with me having a Carrion Crow, that can only mean crowd's favor, or, like I said, the Devouring Light. But if I block with the Wall of Frost on the Borderland Marauder, then using this Devouring Light on a Carrion Crow is actually not necessarily what my opponent wants to be doing. I would really like to keep the Wall of Frost around, and I think my best shot at doing that is to block the Forge Devil with it. I don't think I can beat the Devouring Light if my opponent has it, but that way I think I'm getting a good trade no matter what, especially I'm taking no damage. And I do need to draw lands here, but if I don't draw a land, I still have a pretty good shot to draw something castable with 4 lands in play. Yep, and that's when you draw Covenant of Blood, which is just absolutely uncastable. Opponent is down to 1 card. And if I don't block here, I just take 5 for no reason. I don't think I can afford to do that. And if I draw lands, I'm getting to cast my spells anyway. So I would be very surprised, if we didn't see the Inferno Fist getting sacrificed. Does my opponent have another Inferno Fist? I think he... No. Okay, Divine Favor, that's better for me. Clearly. Sign in Blood. Yeah, of course. I talked about Sign in Blood a whole bunch. And then I draw it at exactly the wrong moment, pretty much. So now I kind of have to hope that my opponent plays into the Aether Spouts, which isn't entirely unlikely. I'm taking 3 here, And then my opponent has a pretty good reason just to attack with everything next turn. If he doesn't, if he tries to play around either spouts, I get to flash to dust. So I think I might actually be lucky here with the either spouts. I mean, not casting anything with 6 cards in hand is pretty crazy. But if my opponent doesn't spend a lot of time thinking here, he might just run into it. It looks like that's what's happening. Just confirm. No confirmation. So if this happens, then I just flash to dust, and my opponent's thinking, well, I missed a bunch of damage here. Which is what I want him to think. Okay, so my opponent actually plays this quite smartly. I think I'm forced to flash to dust to either spouts anyway, because then I get to play the Indulgent Tormentor, and anything that buys me time here is worth it. Let's see, my opponent will draw one of these, so I kind of have to hope that my opponent's last card isn't a Lightning Strike. If it is, I think I have a very bad chance of winning. Also, it appears that my opponent f6'd here. At least this either spouts was very quick to resolve. And I personally wouldn't f6 if I was holding a Lightning Strike. But that's just me. Okay, I was right at least. And my opponent is going to draw 2 cards that aren't going to help him too much here. Yeah, he was holding a land. I think we might be doing it here again. At the edge of our seed, pretty much. I know my opponent's next draw step. That's going to be the 1/2 that grows. So my opponent has the 3 mana for the Gargoyle Sentinel, and that means I'm just going to flash to dust to not take any damage. And then I have the Coral Barrier or anything else really to block on the ground. I think that should be good. The either spot's being quite nice because I can plan ahead quite easily. Opponent just paying 3 again, I suppose. A land is also great news. So now I really want to get the Coral Barrier down, which double blocks the Borderland Marauder. And I'm on 10, but I have the 2 Covenants, so I think my best line here ultimately is going to be to raise my opponent. By attacking here, I open myself up to an attack for 3. But I'm also a lot more likely to win the game with Covenant of Blood very shortly. Okay, and because of this, I might actually want to chump block, which is something I very rarely do. But in this matchup, I think this chump block might be better than taking 3 damage. Is my opponent going to kill the Squid? I don't know. This way I'm definitely keeping the Coral Barrier around, which is kind of important for me because of Covenant of Blood. So yeah, I'm just fine preventing 3 damage with this Squid token here. Hope that my opponent didn't top deck a Lightning Strike. That's kind of important. So what's the next aura? Nothingness. That's good. Are you taking 3 again? Of course, I'm hoping that my opponent goes down to 8 so that Covenant of Blood just kills him. And this is not an easy decision. I mean, starting to sacrifice creatures isn't going to make it more likely to win the game. Opponent with the right choice once again. So now I can bring my opponent down to 6 with the Tormentor attack, and I can Covenant going up to 13. My opponent has 3, 4, 5, 6 points of damage. Even with a Sanctified Charge. Wait, 2, 5, 6. Plus 6 is 12 if my opponent top decks a Sanctified Charge. I think I'm just Covenanting then. Alright, I need one more turn, and I don't think there are too many outs for my opponent. Let's see what my opponent does. Nothing, just the plains. So yeah, it looks like we're getting there. Opponent played really well against the Ether Spouts, but ultimately putting 2 cards on top of my opponent's deck gave me exactly the time I needed for the Indulgent Tormentor. And my last cards, the last card in my opponent's hand was a land, which was also key. So ultimately, after the Ether Spouts, my opponent drew the 2 cards that I knew I would be able to beat, and nothing that was too scary afterwards. So I think that ultimately, of course, went pretty well for me. And that's it. My opponent concedes the game. We got there somehow, and I'll be back in 2 minutes for the finals.
If you'd like to purchase Magic Online cards at competitive prices, check out our web store at mtgoacademy.com/store.
Hello and welcome to the finals on the Play with our Welcome Turn Game 1 deck. And we actually have a Welcome Turn start. I'm going to keep this. I really like this hand. 4 very cheap cards, with one of them pretty much negating the fact that our cards aren't high impact. And pretty much exactly what I want to do in this format. Having a bit of ground defense, taking it to the air really quickly, having a Crippling Blight for all the good early drops in most decks pretty much. So yeah, very, very, very happy. Now, I do have to see if I want to attack my Typhoid Rats into a potential Raise the Alarm, especially given that this is the finals. My opponent is just very likely to have a good deck and not a deck that passes on 2 mana. Now, it might still be advantageous to trade the Typhoid Rats for an opponent's Raise the Alarm token, because I'm delaying cards like Seraph of the Masses or Willforged Golem. So it's not exactly clear how to play this. I actually think that I want my opponent to cast the Erase the Alarm, and I'm even willing to 2-for-1 myself with a Crippling Blight just to delay these kind of good Convoke cards, including Triplicate Spirits. And I'm playing another Welcome Turn on the same turn. So yeah, if my opponent has the Erase the Alarm, I think I'm happy with the trade, even if it's not a good one for me. And of course, there's the chance that my opponent doesn't have it, which makes it all the better. So yeah, super happy now. And clearly, if my opponent doesn't have Raise the Alarm, then dropping the Merc Lurkers is advantageous, because it uses my mana more effectively. Marked by Honor. Alright, my deck should be pretty good against Marked by Honor, I think. Especially with the Typhoid Rats already here. No reason to Crippling Blight. I want to hold back the Rats on defense. I don't want to get hit by a 3-4 Vigilance. It's not entirely necessary. Alright, my opponent's best line is to play a Flyer to suit up with the Marked by Honor. If my opponent does that, then I still have the Crippling Blight to prevent it from blocking. Pill of Light takes out my, where is it? Merc Lurker. But I have a lot of flyers, so that's fine. If I don't draw a land here, I can still Sign in Blood. Hopefully drop the Welkin turn. I think that is better, especially now that I have a 5-drop. I really want to draw into some lands. Don't think that's too greedy. And punished. So one thing I could do is actually offer the trade here, but that's still worse than to wait on that. There's an argument to be made that I don't really want to trade the Typhoid Rats for the Pilgrim, so that I could also attack if my opponent maybe doesn't want to block, but overall I'm in a pretty good spot here. The card I don't want to see is Triplicate Spirits, and that's live now. and I'm pretty fortunate. The quality of my opponent's plays has been rather low, I have to say. So I could Into the Void here, but it doesn't look like I want to bounce these two creatures. If my opponent has a Mass Calcify in his deck, then he's kind of getting me here. But I guess I could use the Crippling Blight just to play around that. Okay, my opponent has seen enough. Would have been interesting to see if my opponent actually has a Mass Calcify, because I don't think that I would have lost to it with my hand. But on the other hand, there's not really a reason to find out. So I'm playing against green, white. Not sure what I want here. It's not a clear aggro matchup. It's also not a clear control matchup. I'm playing the finals, so there is going to be some powerful cards in my opponent's deck, but I have no real way of finding out. If my opponent's deck is aggressive, I think that Festigloom should be great. If it's ramping into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 drops, then Festigloom can be pretty bad. And the Festiglooms do have the price that my Welkin turns are just super soft to it. So I'm kind of scared of my opponent having flyer defense and or triplicate spirits here, which my deck doesn't do too much against. The problem is, like I said, Festigloom with all these Welkin turns is not something I'm willing to do. And the other cards are just not really good depending on what my opponent has. And like I said, I don't know what my opponent has yet. And because of that, I think I'm just keeping it exactly like it is. I have the bounce to punish the auras. I have either Spouts Into the Void. Turn to Frog is good against green monsters, as is Typhoid Rats. And I mean, all these 5-drops here are going to be good no matter what. It's not like my deck desperately needs a Covenant of Blood, for example. And yeah, if I lose the next game, I still have game 3 to sideboard accordingly. Another nice hand, a bit clunky, especially because Welkin turn is not going to block, but I'm willing to risk my opponent having a super quick draw here. Okay, that makes it better. Still starting with a swamp, but this time I'm going to drop 2 islands next, just so that I can Wall of Frost. And this is actually the start that I talked about, I think, during deck building. Having Welkin turn into Wall of Frost can be really awkward for your opponent. What is he going to do, especially now that he's going to get maybe another Marked by Honor? Yeah. This is just really frustrating to play against. This is why I love Wall of Frost so much. It does have more than 4 toughness, so it is a potential target for Pillar of Light. Okay, Marked by Honor. This is really interesting. Could mean that my opponent is preparing some kind of trick to punch through the wall. Maybe even has a Spectral Ward in his hand. That would be kind of solid. Not much I can do about it. I'll just play the Murklurker, see what my opponent does. And if my opponent has a pump spell to kill my Wall of Frost, then the Pilgrim still stays tapped, right? It does. Oh no, actually not. It just doesn't untap, it doesn't tap it. So yeah, this is the only line that makes sense. I was expecting an attack here. And if my hand wasn't so full, I could actually see not blocking, just to not allow my opponent to cast spells. I really want my opponent to cast spells though. And I kind of want to keep the Wall of Frost around because it's so much more difficult for my opponent to deal with the Wall of Frost. So I'm offering the Murklurker with pretty much the knowledge that my opponent has to cast a combat trick either way. So the Ranger's Guile does mean that I basically gave my opponent a good trade here. But knowing what my hand is, the longer my creatures stick around and the more plays I'm making, the more likely I am to win. Also, I'm happy that my Flesh to Dust, for example, isn't getting countered by a Ranger's Guile. Also, clearly, I have the Gravedigger, so that's definitely important. What is this? A Convoke card that only costs 5? Up to 5. Okay, this is going to be a Wall of Frost block. My opponent has the Titanic Growth or the Devouring Light now. Then I lose the wall. And then the Tormentor is going to put my opponent into a lot of trouble. Don't know what my opponent is going to do. I mean, sacrificing Raise the Alarm tokens is an option. Taking like 3 additional points in addition to the 7 I'm dealing here is, I don't think is. Looks like Titanic Growth, yes. It's funny, like these exchanges, like losing a guy to Ranger's Guy, losing another great creature to Titanic Growth, are pretty bad. But given what else I'm doing, I'm happy with pretty much all these exchanges. So it all depends on the context of what you're doing. I'm not sure if I want to cast the Gravedigger here. Signing Blood is also pretty good on my opponent, targeting my opponent. Like, the Gravedigger is not going to get back anything that's relevant to me winning this game. Tapping out for Welkin turn seems kind of weak. Tapping out for Welkin turn only. And I'm not sure if I need to keep the Signing Blood. I guess that's the difficult question. Do I keep the Signing Blood to potentially kill my opponent next turn? Or do I just maybe hold up Flesh to Dust to kill any kind of blocker my opponent has? And what is my plan if my opponent actually has the Triplicate Spirits to stay alive much longer than I want him to? I guess Triplicate Spirits is a good reason to just continue playing a normal game rather than trying to be too fancy here. I'm ahead here, so there shouldn't be a reason not to try to get further ahead, rather than thinking that I can't lose and then lose because of that, if that makes any sense. So I think with this, I still have the Flesh to Dust for a potential Seraph of the Masses, and I know that my opponent has some kind of Convoke card, most of which wouldn't matter at this point. So I have that part covered. I also have the Tormentor in play. Now, what I do not have anymore is the Gravedigger to get it back, but I think that's probably not super relevant. So is it Seraph of the Masses or is it Triplicate Spirits? It's actually Triplicate Spirits. So I think my opponent thought that he could cast these last turn, and that of course didn't work out. So we have a game here, which I was kind of expecting. Okay, yeah, my opponent sacrifices a soldier. That's an easy decision. And I drew an island. So, my opponent is on 7. I have no burn potential. The Signing Blood is gone. The Tormentor trades with 3 spirits, which is kind of funny because the Welkin turns are pretty much guaranteed to get me there. But still, trading the Tormentor for 3 spirits is horrendous if my opponent has another Triplicate Spirits. This is really interesting. I think my best line is to offer the trade with Welkin turn with one of the spirits so that my Tormentor can attack next turn if my opponent doesn't have another flyer. And because I'm also dropping another flyer and holding up Flesh to Dust, I'm safe from most plays that my opponent could make. What I do not have is a blocker for Heliod's Pilgrim, but that's really not that interesting. The card I'm most scared about is Ephemeral Shields because it also doesn't cost my opponent anything. And I'm allowing my opponent to deal quite a bit of damage with Heliod's Pilgrim. Venom Sliver, that's okay. If my opponent was carefully evaluating what happened here, then he already knows that I'm holding a 5 mana spell, because otherwise I would have cast the Murklurker. And now it might be a good time to Flash to Dust. So the Pilgrim is gone. The Tormentor, well, I have to keep the Tormentor around, otherwise I'm not winning the game. That's pretty obvious. So it's actually better not to block here. The Tormentor should win me the game if it's allowed to stay alive. Soldier down. No, card for me. Even better. Next Flash to Dust. So now I have 8 mana, which is exactly enough for the Murklurker and the Flash to Dust. And I can only assume that my opponent blocks with a Spirit token here. If my opponent doesn't, then I could actually be in trouble against Sanctified Charge, which I didn't really do the math on. But I thought that with the Murklurker and 3 blockers, I should be fine against the potential charge. Also considering that I have pretty good board for that. Okay, so this is just the same block that I did at the very first chance. This game, it looks like nothing is happening. I guess I'm still losing to a Mass Calcify. Don't think that there is much I can do about it. Charging Rhino is fine. So here I just have to try to Flash to Dust the Spirit. I have 5 points of damage in the air. And if my opponent doesn't have Ephemeral Shields or... hey, wait. If my opponent doesn't have Ephemeral Shields or Devouring Light, then I just win. And my opponent conceded, which means that we somehow got there. I don't think my deck was favored, and the amount of games we lost and the amount of mulligans we took was definitely a sign of that. And ultimately, I think that just trying to beat my opponent's deck and not trying to make this blue-black deck as good as possible in the abstract was absolutely crucial for this whole draft. Like, for example, a card like Into the Void is the more tempo-oriented card, just like Welkin Turn. The card like Gravedigger, the Murklurkers, a lot of other cards in my deck were for the more grindy situations. And ultimately, not allowing my opponents to play their best game with their decks was the key to level the playing field, because my overall card quality I don't think was phenomenal. The amount of removal was great, which allowed me to play so flexibly. And Indulgent Tormentor was also an absolute all-star, so I'm not going to complain. I mean, either spot's also a pretty busted Magic card. So yeah, another win in M15 core set draft, the penultimate core set draft to ever be drafted by us. At least that's what it looks like right now, which makes me kind of sad, but I'm enjoying it while I can, and I hope you are too. I'm Simon Götzen, and I'm recording Simon Says for the great people at mtgoacademy.com. I'll be back. See you next time.